Good evening and welcome to the second instalment of the COBRA meetings explained by a teacher for students. So obviously since my last explanation, my last video, there have been another 3 COBRA announcements. Again, although you or I may not agree with everything that's been said, I have to say I've been pretty impressed with the coordinated effort and joined up thinking by the government. It may not have correlated with what's happening elsewhere in the world, but it's very clear that we are at different stages. Actually, London is a different stage from the rest of the country. So on Monday, they focused on updated advice on social distancing. And on social distancing, I mean, last video I did, we talked about who was vulnerable, and we talked about the elderly, people with chronic conditions, kidney, liver, I'm adding to that the neuron problems, motor neuron disease, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy. We included diabetes, spleen problems, sickle cell anemia. We said people with a weakened immune system, chemotherapy patients, people with HIV or AIDS, those who are pregnant, those who have had an organ transplant or seriously overweight. So those are real issues in terms of people who are vulnerable and how we should look after them. So what is social distancing? So the advice from the GP was those of people keeping away from people who have the symptoms. And remember, those symptoms were the cough, the persistent, the new cough, and a fever. Those are the main symptoms that we're thinking about if we get or if we want to be away from. To be aware to not be doing any non-essential travel, especially public transport. Try therefore to work from home if you can. Avoid large gatherings. And I think government and many very responsible organisations have stopped those gatherings, which is, you know, really great to see because we're really all pulling together. And what's been really difficult are the small public gatherings. And that's, you know, if you're going to the pub, you know, very enclosed spaces, you're going to a theatre, it's not enclosed, but you've got a lot of people close by you, or a club, and, you know, it's really being aware. And we had an assembly this week, and we made our pupils sit in every other chair, and therefore held more assemblies so that we could enable our pupils to sit in every chair and have spaces. The hardest thing I thought anyway was being far from friends and family. Now, we can still call them, we can still have some social interaction, and we've got to think about our mental health as our vulnerable people and ourselves. We've got to use positive social media and let go of any negative social media, because there's a lot of negativeness around us, negativity. Use telephone, you know, old school. Use the postal system as we can. And of course, you know, Facebook, Skype, have some meetings, Teams, and get used to speaking to some people in a different way. We're told strongly, they've been strongly advised to do these things. They'll help us manage our numbers for our NHS. We'll keep on hand washing. We still need to cough or sneeze into tissues, throw them in a bin, and clean often at home. So the second thing, as we said, that was in terms of this one. So number 2. And that was financial work. And there's financial help. The government, you know, have talked about what help they're going to give. It's not so directly related to what my year 10 pupils might talk about, but of course they are interested because it affects other people around them. We know Rishi Sunak, he's a chancellor, and he said that he will use £330 billion to help aid businesses and mortgage owners, cutting business rates for small businesses for 12 months. But he did say that this number will be revised according to what will happen. It's the uncertainty. Yeah, I agree. There's no point saying, what he gave to the banks, or what, not he, but the government gave to the banks years ago, 500 billion. Yeah, it's not the same number, but it's about incrementing it as we need it. And that's important. That's important to know that it's being thought of. And of course, then we'll come to our biggie. And our biggie is number 3. And it's big for me. And it's big for my pupils because it's about education. So it was about closing schools. And that's happening in England from Friday PM. And they said that they would close the schools, but if you are a key worker, and I listened to LBC on my way home from work today, that LBC have said, the government have said, the key workers would be any NHS staff, any care workers, and also delivery personnel. I mean, that's to help our infrastructure going, so we don't run out of things like toilet roll, chickpeas and tomato tins. And incidentally, the supermarket chains have been really careful about now. People have been stockpiling, and we've been careful about how we are managing the amount of retail that's been going on. People should be choosing, they've said 2 or 3 per person, and then giving a specific exclusive time, which is so nice, so really well-meaning, exclusive time for our vulnerable, the people I mentioned before, to come along and actually do their shopping. And that is superb. So going off on a tangent, that's something that we need to think about. Other factors thinking of in education is then what's going to happen to school meals. And, there's been a lot of discussion about how people who have access to free school meals, suddenly they're being asked to stay at home. How do families pay for their school meals, or what about those children most vulnerable? The government have promised that there is something that's going to happen. Again, we need to look at the logistical efforts of that, as well as the government effort for rates, business rates, etc., and how that's going to work. Something close to my heart, because that's something that is part of my remit at school, and I love doing this, and that's teacher training. So we're looking at trainee teachers and NQTs, newly qualified teachers. What's going to happen to their training process? So far, we're coming up to Easter, so we can say, yes, 2 terms have happened. Then what happens with the assessments and the observations? What is the government going to recommend in terms of that going forward? So that's one big question that I personally have. The teachers that I work with are absolutely working tirelessly. They are covering for other staff who have got people who need to self-isolate. So they're looking after people in their house. They themselves are self-isolating because they may exhibit symptoms, as are a few pupils around in many of our schools, as are around in Surrey and London. And these teachers who are still in school, they are leading and preparing cover lessons. They're preparing and leading own classes currently that are still going on in the classroom. And of course, they're preparing, which takes quite a long time, online learning lessons through many different media. And it's about, some people are learning how to use certain media for the first time. It's very difficult. The phrase, these are unprecedented times, has been used so much, but how else can we explain it? I just want the students, and we've talked, students, year 10, my year 10, please do cherish the rest of this week. It's only a couple of days. The principal of my school, our principal, she rightly said that every school day is a bonus, and I think that most teachers agree. Being with your friends, having access to learning, that will be something that you miss in the future. And at the moment you have that, and that's so, so important. Exams have been a massive conversation. Actually, I'll bring that back to think about exams. And at the moment, we're talking about A-level and GCSE and what is going to happen. We don't know exactly, but there's been some forums through the government that have said that that's not going to happen. So we're talking about motivating our pupils, thinking about how we can support them, and giving them as much mental health support as a factor, because they're going to be the first generation of GCSE and O-level students that haven't actually been able to take their exams in the way that we've known it in the past. So we've got to think about how they work going forward. Within today's COBRA meeting questions, so I'm going to call it 3B, we had some extra information about testing for corona, testing for COVID-19, and the government have said that they will they will include at least 25,000 tests per day, because it was really something that wasn't available to us in my last message that I gave on Friday last week. They said that they're going to stop testing. So now, because the World Health Organization and also the government have realised, this needs to change. But even better than testing, so this is testing for having COVID-19. Now we're testing if you had COVID-19. And the way that you do that is to test for antibodies. So bear with me with a crude diagram. This is COVID-19. What a horrible looking, smiling, not very good. A horrible looking virus. So COVID-19, if this was to infect you or infect a person, this person would then make antibodies, and that would be from B white blood cells, B lymphocytes. And these B lymphocytes will go, oh my goodness, something's entered the body, and they will produce antibodies of different shapes on them. So the different shapes could be something like this, could be something like this, and from my diagram, I know something like that. But we'd produce thousands of these. Now this is the one that would match. So on our COVID-19, I made him angry eyebrows, might give him eyelashes, or her eyelashes. This antibody would come and attach, and as it attaches, it would make possibly very many different things happen. It could make the pathogens stick together. It could make other white blood cells come along, phagocytes, come and destroy them. They'll literally swallow them up. And when this happens, it means that we have then produced these antibodies. So a test has been made to see if we have these antibodies. And if we have them, that means we've had COVID-19. And then we can go, if we feel better, feel properly better, go back to work and not infect anyone, hopefully, depending on how it mutates, because there's still some work there. So underlyingly, there's some good things happening today. We are all taking things with a pinch of salt, but the government, we feel, are moving in the right direction. And I'm going to finish with classic, wash your hands for 20 seconds. Good nights and have a good evening.